Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Welcome to Brilliant Business TV, conversations with leading experts in business. I am your host, Mark Stephen Pooler. We have a wonderful guest today, Dr. Russell Kennedy. Anxiety, stress, depression, it's such a universal issue globally, and that is going to be the topic of our show today. So I'm really looking forward to bringing in Russell into the broadcast. I just want to make an official shout out to our show sponsors, Dreamweaver Artist Ranch. We are streaming live on mspnewsglobal.com. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and we're also streaming through the E360 TV network under Fresh Takes, going out to Apple TV, Fire TV, Android TV, Roku TV, and many, many more. Let's bring in our incredible guest, Dr. Russell Kennedy. Hey, Russell, welcome to Brilliant Business TV. How are you today?
I'm good. That's quite a list of places this goes out to. I would have done my hair better if I knew I was going to go to all those places. But hey, we'll do our best.
It's a little bit of a mouthful, Russell.
Yeah.
So I mentioned anxiety, such a universal issue. At some point, I would go as far to say everyone suffers with some kind of anxiety. This is what you specialize in. I would just like you to take us back a bit about your past and background that has led you to the work you do today with anxiety.
Yeah, sure, Mark. I grew up in a family where my father had schizophrenia and bipolar. So there was a lot of chaos in my family. And I learned that I had to be vigilant all the time to watch for my dad. He was never abusive or violent, but he could go manic and stay up for 4 days at a time. He could get severely depressed. He could get psychotic and lose touch with reality. So I developed this vigilance, this always being on guard for him. And then as I got older, that kind of developed into, okay, I want to help other people with this. I don't want to other people have to suffer with it the way I did. So I became a medical doctor, and then I studied anxiety really in depth because I suffered from anxiety. I suffered from anxiety for 30 years, and I tried virtually all sorts of traditional therapy, talk therapy, ACT, CBT, EMDR, and all of those things helped a little bit, but they didn't really heal me. And it wasn't until I did Lsd and Ayahuasca in my 50s that I really saw where the root of anxiety was. And the root of anxiety in me was stored in my body. It was in my solar plexus. And when I started seeing that's where the problem was, I was wondering, why am I doing all this work on my mind when maybe the problem is this alarm energy that's stored in my body? And that's what's creating a lot of the thoughts of the mind. So I really devoted a lot of my attention to healing that alarm in my body, which is really this connection with my younger self. And then when I did that, the anxiety dissipated, fairly quickly. Like it was a year, but still, a lot of people are struggling with this, and I hear all the time, it's like, I've had this for 30 years. I don't think I'm ever going to get rid of it. And I thought the same thing until I finally found like psychedelics and somatic therapy. And that's what I write about in the book.
Firstly, thank you for sharing your story. It's really inspiring because I can imagine that was quite traumatic to go through as a child, and you may not have even realised how that had affected you until later on in life. But that's quite a hard thing to see a parent going through, and I can imagine that did cause a lot of the problems later in life. What I do want to bring up, Dr. Russell, it's not very often you hear doctors sharing about LSD and ayahuasca.
Sure.
And I've tried LSD, I've never done ayahuasca, but I always hear such incredible things about it. I think Will Smith is raving about it at the moment,
Right.
all over media,
Sure.
saying he's never done anything, and now he's had this transformational, life-changing moment. What would you say to the people out there who may be a little bit thinking it's controversial talking about these methods, and just share a little bit about your experience with them as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm kind of a mixed mind about it because people with anxiety love to make the uncertain certain. So they create this kind of feeling in their body and in the thinking in their mind of safety. So we're kind of control freaks. What ayahuasca and psilocybin and the other psychedelics do is they basically take away your ability to think. So if you are heavy into control, which we are, which most anxiety people hate uncertainty, and we're big into control. When you take a psychedelic, it completely takes that away from you. So it's terrifying. So I'm not a big proponent of actually taking psychedelics. MDMA I'm okay with because MDMA isn't a true psychedelic, and it gives you this feeling of like loving everything. And it's funny when I took MDMA, not to get high, like this is basically kind of in a controlled setting to try and understand what was going on in my mind. Everything was love. Like everything just felt love. I felt connected to everything. And I did to some extent with ayahuasca and LSD at points as well. But in MDMA, I was in control the whole time. You know, with LSD, psilocybin, and ayahuasca, I was definitely not in control. It was the most terrifying, horrifying experience of my life. I did learn from it, but I wasn't quite the same for 2 years. So it's not one of those things like, oh, I've got this horrible addiction to alcohol or drugs, or I'm depressed, or so I should do psychedelics. I don't agree with that. What I often say is do 6 months of somatic therapy, like somatic experiencing therapy. Get into your body, get a sense of safety. And then if you still want to do it after that 6 months, then do it. Because I'm not a big proponent of going, hey, this will cure you. Now, there are people that have had great success with it. And those are the people that will shout from the rooftops. There's a bunch of other people who didn't have much success with it at all, who it didn't do much, or it just terrified them, and you don't hear from them. So you really have to kind of be very careful that this is the answer, because for a lot of people, it's not. And for some people it is. And the ones that it really helps are the ones that sort of shout it from the rooftops, like Will Smith or whatever. So you have to be really careful with psychedelics. For me personally, LSD showed me that anxiety wasn't in my mind. And for a medical doctor and a neuroscientist to say that something isn't in the brain is like, well, I'm way out in left field now. I don't know what I'm going to do because this is my specialty. So I had to really retrain my framework around anxiety to embrace this feeling of alarm that was locked in my body. And it wasn't until I did that. So LSD actually showed me that it wasn't until I actually did that and focused on the alarm in my body that I actually started to heal. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Yeah, I'm glad I did it. It was terrifying and I wasn't quite right for 2 years, but it did lead me to the theory of my book, and it did lead me to my own healing eventually. But it wasn't kind of like I took it and then a week later I was like, hallelujah, thank you, Lord, I'm cured. It wasn't anything like that.
I had to smile when you were talking about MDMA being in a controlled environment.
Right, because not your experience.
Back in my clubbing days, it was the clubbing go-to of the drug choices to go to. So I have done it. I'm not recommending anyone tries drugs out there, but that is the drug that does give you that real boost and loving feeling. But maybe because mine wasn't controlled, it is a very powerful substance. You have to be so careful. And like I'm saying, we're not advising to go out and take drugs, just talking of our experience. It's also, you mentioned about anxiety not being in your mind. Could you just elaborate
Sure.
on that a little bit?
Sure. Okay, so here's the short version of what I believe happened to me and what I believe happened to a lot of people. My dad was very loving and caring and nurturing when he was sane. When he was insane, he would just leave me. So I had this sense that love isn't safe. So that I grew up through that, and that create this sense of alarm in my system. When you can't trust love, like you get alarmed. That's just exactly what happens. So when I had this alarm in my system, I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't even know it was there for the longest time. So when I say anxiety isn't so much in your mind, what I think we do as children is if we have experiences that are too much for our little minds to bear, I think we take those experiences, and Freud would call it repression or suppression or whatever, and we stuff those down and they go into our body. And the body is the representation of the unconscious mind. So by proxy, I believe that those traumas get stored into our body. So we don't want to go back down into our body. So what we do is we stay up in our heads. So we ruminate, we worry, and we hate uncertainty because of what pain uncertainty created for us when we were younger. So if you hate uncertainty, you want to make the uncertain certain. And one of the ways of doing that is to worry and to ruminate and stay in your head. Because if you could stay up in your head with all these horrible worries, and the worries have to get more and more intense to keep us up in our head so we don't drift down into our body where all our old trauma is. So we get wrapped up to living in our heads. And it's not very satisfying because life is in your body. Life is in sensation. Life is in emotion. Life is in way we feel. It's not in the way we think. And that's the way our society is structured now. It's like, think better and you'll feel better. I'm the opposite. Go to the body. Feel better and you'll think better is basically what happens.
Yes.
So if you're ever stressed and tense, and you tell yourself, hey, calm down, or you say someone else, hey, calm down, does that work? No, it doesn't work. But if you say, hey, put your hand on your chest, take a few breaths, like just, feel your feet flat on the ground, feel the support of the earth up underneath you, and just breathe into that and slow everything down. Does that work? Yeah, it does. Because you're working at the engine of what creates your thinking. So your feeling in your body creates your thinking. So if your feeling is alarmed, if you have all this alarm from childhood, that's going to poison your thinking. And then when you think these negative thoughts, of course, because the mind and the body react the same way to a thought as opposed to it actually happening for the most part, the body gets more alarmed. And when the body gets more alarmed, you get more anxious thoughts. Because the brain is a meaning-making, make-sense machine. What it wants to do is make sense of everything. So if it has this uncomfortable feeling of trauma in your body, it's going to make a story that's consistent with that trauma, which is usually some worries, what ifs, warnings, worst-case scenarios, all these things, which only loop back and make the alarm worse. So we get into this alarm anxiety cycle. The alarm is in the body, the anxiety is in the mind, and they just loop on each other. And until I found this and realized that you could separate the two, then I started to heal. But until I separated the two, until I saw, behind the curtain, until I saw the actual cause, that it was alarm making anxiety, which made alarm, and breaking them apart, then I healed.
That makes total sense. I'm a big fan of neuroscience. I'm a big fan of consciousness and all the spiritual leaders and how science and spirituality are coming together. And they all do say your thoughts are important, but your emotions are what is ruling everything. And that is exactly what you're saying there. It makes total sense. And I'm guessing it takes inner work and really digging deep to find out what some of those emotions and traumas are, because they could go back years ago, can't they?
They could even go back into, when you're in utero with your mother. If your mother and father had, a very tumultuous relationship before you were born, or if you were given up for adoption, there's all these things that, before as a medical doctor, I would look at this stuff and go, oh yeah, it's a bunch of hokum or whatever. But now that I really look into it and I see a lot of people who had, intrauterine trauma, physically through like alcohol or something like that, or their mother was so stressed during their pregnancy
Yes.
that they adopted this highly sensitive personality. And I haven't met anyone with anxiety who wasn't a highly sensitive person. So it just, and if you're a highly sensitive person and you grow up in a loving, caring family, you're okay. But if you're a highly sensitive person and you grow up with trauma, then that's when we start getting into problems.
That makes total sense, Dr. Russell. Thank you for sharing that. We're just going to a commercial break, so stay where you are. We've got lots of questions to come. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for part 1 of Brilliance Business TV Conversations with Leading Experts in Business.
Hello, everybody. Cyberchuck 2.0 here. I'm so excited to be able to share my vision of Dreamweaver's Artist Ranch. They say you can't choose your family. Not only am I saying you can choose your family, you get to thrive with your family here at Dreamweaver's Artist Ranch. It's a place for like-minded individuals to come together to share experiences and gain experiences, not only through workshops, through performances, and through exhibits. This is a place where you can disconnect from the outside world and reconnect into a community of people that there is no judgment. There's only support. And this place is an amazing place to grow and to tap into your highest potential and to be able to show off all your talents. This is a place you can come and network and really thrive. I'm so excited for Dreamweaver's Artist Ranch. This is a place where dreams actually come true. I love you all so very much. I'll talk to you all later. Peace.
Welcome back to Brilliance Business TV Conversations with Leading Experts in Business. Today we're joined with the incredible Dr. Russell Kennedy, the Anxiety MD. He has shared his personal journey, and we have really been talking about how anxiety can affect us, how it's not in our mind, how it's in our emotions, and our trauma holds within our body. Dr. Russell, welcome back to Brilliance Business TV.
It's a pleasure, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Russell, why does traditional therapy not work for anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because, traditional therapy, again, focuses on the mind, right? Trying to make you think better. Like if you think better, you'll feel better. And it does work in the short term, but it's like being in a rowboat and the rowboat's filling up with water. Traditional therapy, talk therapy is like bailing water out. So the water level drops a little bit, you feel a little bit better, but it doesn't do anything for the underlying root cause. The underlying root cause is that alarm energy that's stored in your body. So when you address the alarm energy stored in the body, you actually seal the hole in the floor of the boat. So no more water comes in. So what talk therapy does is it tries to fix a feeling problem with a thinking solution, which doesn't make sense. It doesn't actually work long term. It makes you feel better in the short term, absolutely. And that's why CBT and talk therapy, you finish a chat with your therapist and you feel better when you walk out. But it doesn't change things particularly over the long term. And I see people in my practice who've said, I've been in talk therapy for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And it kind of keeps me afloat, literally, but it doesn't fix the underlying problem. So what I do, and my wife is a somatic trauma therapist. So she really goes into the body. I go into the body. I use a lot of neuroscience and kind of some cognitive approaches too, but mostly it's accessing these old programs in the body. So I'll find, I'll take people into a trauma, like when you were younger and you saw that your parents were divorcing, and, I'll get you to close your eyes. It's like, where do you feel that in your body? And people will often feel it between their chin and their pubic bone, and they'll go, oh, there's this energy kind of around my solar plexus, and how big is it? Well, it's about the size of my fist. Is it got a temperature? Is it painful? It's like a pressure? Does it radiate anywhere? Yeah, it kind of goes up into my heart and into my back. It's like, okay, well, let's just focus on that. Let's just put our hand on that. Let's just focus on that. Let's just sort of see if we can bring you back to that place. Because there is a theory in psychology that if you experience a significant trauma, part of you gets halted at that age that you experience the trauma. So what I try and do is I take people back into that trauma through their body, through the feeling, because that sense of alarm, I believe, is their younger self asking for attention. So rather than pushing it away, which is what we do when we feel this uncomfortable alarm, we push it away. I get people to embrace it. Like, put your hand over it, connect to it, really see if you can find that child in you. And then we can kind of work through it as a kind of a conduit to that old trauma, and then start unhooking that old trauma a little bit. And then I bring them back out of it, and we go into a place that's calm and peaceful. And then we go back into the trauma a little bit, and then we go back into the place that's calm and peaceful. And that pendulation, that back and forth, is what shows people that, even though they're transported back to a 7-year-old whose parents are getting divorced, they're actually being brought back into the present moment as well. So if we look at a bit of neuroscience here, the amygdala and the hippocampus are two structures in the brain that are involved in memory. So if we can reignite the hippocampus again as an adult, show you in no uncertain terms that you are actually in this present moment. You're not back there as a child anymore. You're not that helpless child watching your parents get divorced anymore. Then that sort of starts to unhook that old program. And then you start getting a little crack of light, because when we go into those old programs, it's completely dark in there, because it takes us back to that point where it was helpless and hopeless, and we were 7, 8, 10, 13 years old, and there was no way out. So I show you that there is a way out. There's a way out through your body. There's a way through connecting with the present moment. There's a way of connecting, into the mirror with yourself, showing your unconscious and conscious mind that you're not trapped back there anymore. You're actually in the present moment. Because the amygdala has no sense of time. So the amygdala is this commonly called fear center of the brain. I don't like that term very much, but it works. So basically, the amygdala has no sense of time. So when that memory comes back into awareness, you get transported back to that age that the trauma occurred, and part of you stays there and is locked there, and that's the part of you that feels alarm, which creates your anxiety. So that's where we're getting to the root cause of what causes anxiety. So if I can help unhook that and show you that you are not that child back into that hopeless, helpless situation where you were powerless, you're actually in the present here with me, and you're in your daily life, you're back here, that starts to dissipate. That alarm starts to dissipate. And that alarm, because it's the engine of your anxious thoughts, if that slows down, if that dissipates, then so do the thoughts. And that's exactly what I found with me.
It all does make sense. And what I am thinking as well, Dr. Russell, that once you work on your programming, obviously we're in the personal development space, so I know how our programming is vital, that we get that right to create the results we want. So I'm wondering, if you're working on people's programming, not only would they improve their anxiety, would they go on then to obviously improve all other areas of their life, as in their work life, their social life, because obviously they're coming from a totally different programming, aren't they?
Yeah, because I think what happens is, like, people with anxiety, I was a very highly functional person with crippling anxiety. So I became a medical doctor, a professional stand-up comedian, a professional yoga and meditation teacher, corporate speaker, author, all this stuff, partially driven by my anxiety. Now, in the last, 2 years, when my anxiety hasn't been much of a problem for me, I've been able to finish the book. I've been able to sort of do things like this with you, like be able to speak in front of people. And I think what happens is it gets you into your real, true, authentic self. Because nobody goes to a newborn nursery, and goes, that baby's a narcissist, that baby's a people pleaser, that baby's a manipulator. No one does that. What happens is we grow, when we come into this world, it's not that we come in with a completely blank slate, but we are open to experience. And if the experience is positive and attached and connected, then our brains mature in the way that they're supposed to and allow us to be creative, authentic, real. But if we have trauma, if we have a sick parent, an addicted parent, a parent who is narcissistic, who isn't there for us, a parent who abuses us in some way, then that creates a whole new paradigm for us. And we have to find a way of getting our needs met in, say, a maladaptive way rather than an adaptive way. So what this does is it takes you back into that place. It shows you that you can actually meet your own needs and become your true, authentic self. Now, I'm not saying people are going to be anxiety free. I still get anxiety, but my perception of it now is completely different than it was. And I think the biggest thing that I've taught myself to do is when I feel that alarm, and I still feel it, it still gets me when I get into, my mother broke both of her hips in the last 4 months, and it's definitely coming up for sure. But when I feel it now, I don't automatically fire up the thoughts. I can see that as soon as I get alarmed, I pay attention to the alarm. I focus on the alarm. And as I see the thoughts come up, I have a choice, like Viktor Frankl, when he said there's a space in between stimulus and response. Yeah. And that space is awareness. It gives you a choice. So I have a choice to choose those thoughts or not, as opposed to before when I was deep in alarm and in survival physiology, those thoughts would just take me over. So now I have this, ability to kind of feel the anxiety and just sort of sit with it, and it's just like, and know that my brain is going to start, giving me all these thoughts, like this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And I can separate from that. Whereas before I couldn't see those thoughts. So my psyche was forced to be those thoughts. So if you can see it in curiosity, which takes a lot of the emotion out of it, you don't have to be it. And I think that's how I healed. If you said, what's one thing that shows you that you've healed from anxiety? It's the fact that I can feel alarmed in my system, and then I don't have to add thoughts to it. I can just sit with the alarm, because that breaks the loop. That breaks the whole cycle, the feedback loop, that vicious cycle of alarm in the body and anxiety in the mind. And then once you break the cycle and you see that you can break the cycle, then you're in the driver's seat. The anxiety no longer thinks for you. You are actually thinking for yourself.
That's why your work is so important, Dr. Russell, because all your tools and the way you control anxiety, it's something that you would have to educate yourself so that you can have that perception and really notice how you feel. For some people, like you mentioned, they just go into fear-based thinking and the alarm goes off and they go out of control. So that's why it's great that you're educating people and giving them the tools so that they can really start to manage their own anxiety. Why is your theory of anxiety different, Dr. Russell?
Well, I think most theories of anxiety rely on the mind. If you look at psychiatry, psychology, they're trying to fix the mind. And we have to fix the mind, but we also have to incorporate the body. We have to incorporate the feeling of the body. And it's not so much that we're getting rid of your anxiety. And Bessel van der Kolk wrote this great book called The Body Keeps the Score. And he says in that, we're not teaching people how to get rid of their anxiety. What we're doing is we're teaching them how to acclimatize to their alarm, my word, acclimatize to it so that it doesn't alarm them so much anymore. And they don't have to add thoughts to it anymore. And they have some objectivity around it. So it's more about flowing with it than it is pushing it away. Because like I say, I believe that alarm is our younger self asking for our own attention. And the reason why the alarm has gotten so intense is that we haven't been giving it that attention. So I show people how to give the attention to the alarm and that younger version of yourself that's still inside you, that still hurts. That's what we have to heal. The thoughts, they're secondary.
And what is the goal of your therapy?
The goal of my therapy is simply allowing people to be comfortable in their own skin, so that they can develop their own creativity, their own authentic self. What would you have been like had you not had that trauma? What would you have been like? What would your life be like? What would your worldview be like without that trauma? And then on top of that, because you've had that trauma, you have all this wisdom that you can help other people with. So that's the goal of me, is just to, when people see me, it's so that I can make them feel a lot more comfortable in their own skin, so they can really find their own creative, authentic self.
Now, we are coming to light at the end of the tunnel
Sure.
from the pandemic, but we're still not there yet. There's still a lot of stresses and anxieties going through the motions until we reach the light at the end of the
Yeah.
tunnel. But the last couple of years, I can imagine stress, anxiety, depression has probably gone upwards on the charts, definitely. What would your advice or what words of wisdom do you have for someone out there that may be thinking, well, I've tried everything and it's not working?
Right. Well, I'd ask them if they'd tried feeling it in their body and allowing themselves to feel it. And sometimes it's so painful, you need someone else with you to help you process that feeling. So somatic experiencing is a great form of therapy. Hakomi is another form of therapy that uses the body. Now, I'm not saying we have to only use the body, but I'm just saying most therapies only use the mind. So, if you were going to war with some foreign country and you had an army and a navy, would you just use the army? No, you'd use everything at your command. So I'm saying, yes, absolutely, use cognitive therapy, but find something in the body as well, because the two of them, like a teeter-totter, they almost allow you to get better faster. Because if you just use one, if you only use body-based therapy, you would heal eventually. If you only use talk therapy, you would get better, but there'd always be that point in the body where you're not quite connected and centered with yourself. So the thing about being centered with yourself and learning how to do that is it becomes self-propagating, self-fulfilling. Whereas if you only fix the mind, the ego just kind of tracks people back into the same old thought patterns that they were in before. It's kind of like addiction in a way, because we're addicted to our thoughts. But from the body, we can ground a new way of being. And from a new way of being, we have this new way of thinking. And then we feel like, hey, you know what? This feels bad, but I can handle it. I'm not completely out of control anymore. I can sit here with the pain and I can kind of, deal with it. And ironically, the more you sit with the pain and the more you learn how to adapt to it and regulate your body at the same time, you don't need the thoughts anymore. Like, that's the thing. And then you get to see how your brain would really think if it wasn't in survival mode, which a lot of the time I spent 30 years in survival mode. So, when you're in survival, you don't really see your own gifts when you're in survival. You just see survival. And seeing your own gifts is probably the best part of life.
I would say if you've tried everything and it's not working, or if you're suffering with any kind of anxiety, you must try out Dr. Russell Kennedy, because as he mentioned, most therapies are just working on the mind when it's also in the body as well. Dr. Russell Kennedy, also, I must say, congratulations on becoming a best-selling author with Anxiety RX. Tell our audience a little bit about your book.
Well, I think it's back there, but it's called Anxiety RX. It's written in 108 short chapters, like Eat, Pray, Love. I read Eat, Pray, Love, and I really like that book. Probably not popular for a guy to say that, but I like that book a lot. And I thought if I was going to write a book one day, I'm going to write it in 108 short chapters. And I did that because people with anxiety generally have kind of shortish attention spans, and they like to feel like they're getting something done. So each chapter is kind of a lesson from either my life or my patients' lives that help them heal, and it shows you why you worry, why you do this. So if you can understand the unconscious rationale behind why you worry and why you have this anxiety, you can start to unhook it. But if you just try to think positive, that only lasts a certain amount of time. So the book's been doing wonderfully well. It's out on audiobook too. I was a stand-up comedian, professional stand-up comic for 15 years. So I narrated it myself. I put some jokes in there. I put some impressions in there because it's a fairly heavy subject. It can trigger people.
Yes.
The first two sections can trigger people. But the book is like unlike anything else anyone's ever put out about anxiety before, because I'm a doctor and a neuroscientist with roots in developmental psychology. But I also lived with anxiety myself for 30 years. So it was one of these kind of physician heal thyself kind of things where I had to fix myself. I really had, because I was looking around and like my patients come and see me and they say, I've tried everything. I've tried psychologists, I've tried psychiatrists, I've tried medications, and I did all those things too. And I had to find a way of healing myself. So I lived at a temple in India. I took psychedelics in controlled environments. I became a yoga and meditation teacher. I did all these things that eventually kind of came together and gave me a framework of how I can help other people out of the same hole. Because my thing, and I say this at the end, I do a room on Clubhouse every Sunday, 12 noon Pacific time. And I always say at the end of it, like, I don't want you to have to suffer with anxiety the way I did, because you don't have to. This is a new theory, and it's brand new. Like in the next 5 years, it's going to become more and more popular. So but right now it's really not that well known.
I would encourage everyone out there to get a copy of Anxiety RX. It's on Amazon. There it is, the best-selling book.
It also won the
Anxiety RX.
It also won the Nautilus Award in Psychology for 2020, and that's that little seal right there.
So get your copy of Anxiety RX at Amazon. You can also connect with Russell at theanxietymd.com. His room is ever so successful on Clubhouse. One last thing, Dr. Russell, how would you like our audience to connect with you?
Probably Instagram. I would think Instagram's probably I answer questions on Instagram. I usually get to all my messages on there. It may take me a while, but probably Instagram is probably the best way of kind of your initial. And then you can look in and see my posts and see if my philosophy really jives with what you think.
And that's at the Anxiety MD.
Everything is the Anxiety MD, Mark. Like my YouTube channel is the Anxiety MD. My website's the Anxiety MD. It just, if you just Google the Anxiety MD, I'm easy to find.
Perfect. Dr. Russell, I have thoroughly enjoyed having a conversation with you. Thank you so much for being my guest on Brilliance Business TV.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks for everything you do for people. I really appreciate you as well.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure having you as my special guest today. Thank you, everyone, for watching Brilliance Business TV, conversations with leading experts in business. Until next time, bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.